Hi, this is Shambhavi. Welcome to my weekly podcast about spirituality, love, death, devotion, and waking up while living in a messy world. The Satsang with Shambhavi podcast is recorded live each week with students of our nonprofit community, Jayakula. For more information and to find out about attending a satsang, visit jayakula.org. Thanks for listening. Much love to you, wherever and however you are. The question is, what is the difference between a disciple and a devotee? When I first encountered the lineage of Anandamayi Ma, the first time I went to India and met Indian members of that Sangha, they made the distinction between a disciple and a devotee. And actually, they said a devotee is more in it somehow, more deeply in it. And I would have thought exactly the opposite at that time. I would have thought a disciple is someone who's taken vows and made some sort of commitment, and a devotee is just somebody who has some squishy, nice feelings about the teacher. That was my uninformed view at the time. Then there's something that Anandamayi Ma actually said in Satsang any numbers of times that helped open up a little bit of a door for me to understand why the Indian Sangha thought that devotees were more immersed in the practice and the lineage. Ma said you can either burn your karmas with knowledge or melt them with devotion. Mm-hmm. And even at that time, way back then, melting did seem a little better than burning. Somehow I got the impression from Ma that it would be better to melt than to burn, and that somehow burning was, more aggressive and maybe a little over-effortful. Then fast forward 25 years, and having gone from a practitioner myself who was over-effortful and trying to burn everything up to more of a squishy devotee type of a person, I actually learned about the reality of a practitioner's life and what naturally happens the more that you encounter primordial wisdom or the nature of reality or the nature of the self. And what I learned was something I had absolutely no idea of before. No teacher ever taught me this, because maybe I just didn't have the teachers that would have taught me this. But in any case, what I learned is that devotion is the inevitable destination of everyone on a path of waking up. Whether you start as a rational skeptic, whether you're one of those people that's interested in studies of monks' brains while they're meditating, that's something I've never really been interested in, but a lot of people are. Whether you are interested in how quantum mechanics says the same thing as some spiritual tradition or another, whether you are someone who is involved in sort of more of a kind of a self-inquiry or self-negation or some rationalistic, more thought-based process, whether you are a Buddhist who's watching your breath or watching your thoughts or scanning your body, whether you are starting off as a bhakta in a more traditional sense where your practice is kirtan and chanting certain texts and things like that and having a personal relationship to God, or whether you love to study ancient texts and you're really into learning the original languages, and wherever you start from, you're going to end up at devotion. Now I understand that a devotee is someone who is immersed in devotion. And there's a beautiful, I would say it's sort of a spiritual philosophical poem by a Maharashtrian poet named Jñanadeva, who died before he reached 30 years of age, and wrote an amazing commentary on the Bhagavad Gita. And he wrote this other piece of writing that I absolutely adore. And the last chapter of this little tract is called Natural Devotion. And what he talks about in that is how everything is devoted to everything else. And I can't quote it for you now, but he says things like, the ear is devoted to the sound, and the tongue is devoted to the taste, and the bee is devoted to the flower, and that we're just absolutely immersed in an alive, aware reality whose bhava, whose feeling orientation is itself devotion. When we enter into a more intimate relationship with primordial reality, with the base state, with that eternal livingness, we encounter in a total way, body, energy, and mind, we encounter the devotion of God. If we read the poems of Utpaladeva, someone in our tradition, Trika Shaivism, he wrote beautiful devotional poetry or diaries. And he talks about, I want to enter into your devotion, Lord Shiva. He doesn't always say, I want to feel my devotion. He says, let me enter into your devotion, Lord Shiva. That devotion that's already ongoing, that is actually everything is saturated already in. Why is everything in a state of devotion? Why is the fundamental feeling of all of reality devotion? And why is this our inevitable destination? The self, the subjectivity that is all of reality, is in a state of wonder at its own nature. And that wonder is very connected to devotion. It's almost hard to separate them. If you feel contemplating one's own nature, if you experience your own magnificence, if you experience this speechless wonder at your own self, at this devotion for it just comes pouring out like it would for some unimaginably spectacular piece of music or work of art. So that sense of wonder at what the nature of the self and devotion go hand in hand. They naturally arise together, and they saturate everything. So this is why when you have real contact with that, and it really begins to re-embody you and reconfigure your energy and your mind, and you enter into that, it's not like you're really entering into anything because you're already in it fully, but you begin to have an aware experience of being immersed in that. It is equal to entering into a state of wonder and devotion. So it's inevitable. It really doesn't have much to do with what we would call like the bhakti movement, which has specific practices and a specific view of the world. The natural devotion that I'm talking about is ubiquitous. Like, it doesn't really matter. It has no lineage. It's for everyone. When you get to that point in your spiritual development where you are directly perceiving with all of your senses the nature of the self, that devotion just is naturally there. And no one could have been more surprised than me. I was telling somebody a funny story the other day. When I was studying with one of my main teachers, who was an incredibly aggressive practitioner. I'll tell another side story about him. One time I went over to his house. He was going to show me some hatha yoga, something or others. And we were standing side by side doing some kind of hatha yoga. And he was like turning bright red and huffing and puffing. And I just started cracking up because he was just being so aggressive. So that's the kind of practitioner that he was. And I was sort of a mini him. So I had a little bit of a sense of humor about it, but I was still way too aggressive. So during that same time, I was practicing with that teacher. One of my fellow students I was living with her, and I said to her, I just don't feel a lot of devotion. I don't think I'm a very devotional person, something like that. And she said to me, what? She just looked at me like I was crazy. And she said, you're the most devotional person I know. And then she said, you're like someone who's lost their sunglasses on top of their head. I still don't really know what she was talking about. I guess what she was perceiving was just my relentlessness in trying to discover what's going on here. That's a form of devotion, right? But it didn't feel like what I'm feeling now in my life. Felt a lot more like directed and a little more hard. I've got the squishy sunglasses on now. So now one could say that a disciple is anyone who is following in a serious way the teaching, a specific stream of teachings, or a teacher and a stream of teachings, and doing it, consistently and with commitment, but maybe not having entered into that state of devotion yet. Some people might be there from birth, who knows? I definitely was not, as far as I can tell. But other people might be. I don't think that it is only the result of doing spiritual practice, for sure. Okay. But that's how I discovered it.